by kicking off my drawings with an acrylic paint marker. I capture a backdrop of energy and mess. It also works as a way of letting go of perfectionism right from the get-go. The pan pastel is my next go-to. I tend to put the first marks in very softly with a makeup sponge. I put these guide marks down, and the first thing to think about here is the placement of the figure. I want to make sure there's space for the whole body to be in this picture, and the proportions are organized around that. These marks are all so loose that it can all be changed. There's nothing of this is permanent. For today's study drawing, I was interested in spending a bit of time on looking at arms and the anatomy that you find. So I found a reference that's got quite a bit of information on arms and lovely lighting hitting from around the sides. One thing I really like about gesture drawing is that it opens up for meaning and adds an element of interpretation. As always, you are welcome to use my drawing for your reference. This reference I found on Pinterest, but as always, I use quite an interpretive style, so I'm including the drawing for reference purposes. This drawing is inspired by a work I created together with my sister. We named it Release. This was a photographic print transfer combined with watercolor. Well, there was something about this pose that I wanted to revisit and explore a little bit further. I think it's a style that lends itself very well to expressing something deeper in terms of emotion. And the more I search myself in terms of what it is that I'm looking for in an artwork, it's becoming clear to me that I want to feel something. But it's also through feeling that I am connecting to God. It's that access point to my own spirituality and into a higher plane of what it means to be a human. And through feeling that I experience myself as being a spirit and that I'm loved by God. The pose I'm working with in this picture reminds me a little bit of Dryden Goodwin's drawings called Breathe. There you've got this focus in around the chest, and it's that expressive style as well. And if you don't know Dryden Goodwin, it might be worth looking at his drawings. I thought it's interesting how he's built up this theory around these drawings that relates to pollution, which is something I find incredibly meaningful. It's one great example of how you can use your drawings to express something of importance. But I just can't help when I see his drawings that they immediately bring me into a slightly spiritual zone. It kind of just takes me straight back into Genesis, where it says about Adam that God breathed life into his nostrils and he became a living being. So if you're not the spiritual type, I do apologize for going a bit spiritual on you here. Before I leave Earth behind completely, I will just come back to the drawing here. I'm bringing up the kneaded rubber, trying to cut back a little bit and sort of kind of start to sculpt the figure out of this grey, smoky substance that the pan pastel has created for me. This is something I love when it comes to working with a pan pastel, that it feels so much like sculpture. That sense of starting with a lump and then you slowly start to carve into it, you add and you take away. It's all very soft in the beginning. And now I just come in here with my sketch wiper and I start to add in a little bit of definition. I start bringing in some darker values here. The figure I'm looking at is wearing trousers, but I want the clothes to draw quite minimum attention to themselves. They will become almost part of the body. So I'm just suggesting that there might be some fabric here, there might be some clothes, looking at the head a little bit and just bringing the chin up. When I work on a drawing, I always kind of dart around all over the place. I like to work on the picture as a whole. I don't tend to finish one part of the drawing and kind of work my way across. I like to bounce everything off each other. It's all about having these marks start to work together and create an illusion of something being represented in these marks. I think the superpower in expressive drawing is that the viewer becomes part of the creative process. It's all about adding some details in which hints at other things, and the viewer then goes ahead and creates the missing parts. It offers the viewer the opportunity to fill in the blanks. Leaving things undefined makes a piece open-ended, and something that we can really play around with is the power of leaving things out. As I'm taking you through the process of drawing this picture, I realized that the thing I like to focus on today is the secret ingredient in art, which I think all good art has. It has a point, it has a meaning, and I've been touching a little bit onto what I use as my meaning, as my point, and it's of course emotion. It's about capturing an emotion, and I'm realizing that my message that I would love to give out comes from a gift that I feel like I was given through my parents, in that in our home growing up, it was a space where emotions were allowed. You didn't have to pretend you were feeling better than you were. You could feel the full spectrum of emotions, and with most things like that, what you've grown up with, you don't really realize it's a thing, you just take it for granted. But in my adult years, I've come across it a lot, that this is not the norm, and therefore it's a gift that I can try to pass on through my work. But there are so many ways that we as artists can weave in that secret ingredient into our work. When it comes to using emotion as the secret ingredient in your art, I think another good example of that is Edward Munch's The Scream. I believe the story behind his work was that he was having an intense experience of anxiety and fear as the sky had gone red above him. And that takes me to another good example of how you can use meaning as your secret ingredient in art. Take William Turner, who used the story of seeing a storm from a new perspective. By tying himself to a ship's mast, he was able to witness a storm. But by doing this, he gained something perhaps even more powerful than actually seeing that perspective. He got that story that he could tell of having had that experience. So stories is another way to use meaning as your secret ingredient. Then there is Doris Salcedo, where the meaning really comes through in the materials that she's using, whether it's chairs or tree roots or a giant crack in the floor. And that's definitely a huge one for artists to question themselves on. Can I add the meaning through materials? And sometimes we don't really clarify if there was an intention or a meaning in the work. It's easy to forget when you're trying to keep up with Instagram all the time. But as well as meaning being a secret ingredient, I also think it's an artist's secret weapon. And by using the meaning behind your work, you can really elevate it. And also, it's a way of reaching out not only to other artists, but also reaching out to those who would actually want to buy your work. So that's something that has started to pop up more, and I make note of it when artists bring to the forefront some of the thoughts behind why they've created this thing of beauty that I see, and just introducing the viewer a little bit further in. For example, today when I was looking at different artists, trying to figure out what's the meaning behind these amazing artworks that I see, I found sometimes it's a little hard on Instagram to get into the juicy bits, and there was this one particular artist that had just under every post put something like, "These artworks are available for sale, DM me if you're interested." Her work was just so mesmerizing. In this case, it was a photographer doing these amazing, very open-ended portrait shots, which were had a very chiaroscuro feel, but I just couldn't figure out what the thought process was behind it from looking at her Instagram. To be honest, I could probably say the exact same thing looking at my own Instagram. So in a way, I do these videos as much for myself as I do them for you. But I would like to challenge myself and you to just think a little bit about the meaning. I think to tell our story and allow ourselves to become a little bit vulnerable and to show that your work has a deeper reason for it is a real strong point. And I think it's about time to think of this and figure out ways where we can just add that into the descriptions when you've made a piece of artwork and you're posting it to the public. Just ask yourself, so there's the element of discovering, what are you all about? What is your reason behind your drawings, and how can you make it a habit to communicate those things? This is quite practical, actually. Think about what you would type into a Google search if you wanted to buy an artwork. I think if I was going to type something into Google in order to find an artwork that I would buy, I would probably type in something like black and white, otherworldly, expressive figure drawing in charcoal, themed around emotions, psychology, spirituality. So I guess what I'm saying is to spend some time looking at what is the meaning behind your work. Is it environmental, like Dryden, Goodwin? Political, like Doris, Salcedo? Stories, like William Turner? Expression of emotions, like Edward Munch? History? Identity? Memories? Feminism? Or spirituality? It could be anything, but the important thing is that you go for something that is really true, that really feels true. I think this bit is all about figuring out who you are, but the closer you get to the heart of who you really are as a person, the stronger the art is going to come out. I really believe that knowing who you actually are is the key to creating art that will really be impactful. I think it's time for me to create a bit of an abrupt ending here and just say thank you so much for staying with me today, listening to what I had to say. I hope you will have loads of breakthroughs with your art. And just a little reminder to subscribe if you haven't done that already. And I'd also like to say that your comments mean the world. So if you have anything to say, please share it with me. I'd love to hear from you. Take care and all the best.